Hey guys, welcome to another Tuesday Live. I am your host, Joe.
And I'm his wife, Jen.
And today we've got a special episode and we are live in the backyard. So we're going to be talking about how to negotiate seller finance and creative finance deals, right?
How to close them.
How to close them. And I think that's such a big question that we see so often is, Joe, like, what do these conversations sound like? What's being said? Are there certain questions to ask or certain things that, should I tell them that I'm buying with creative finance and then give them a little mini course on how it all works, right?
Yeah.
And we're here to debunk some of these myths, okay? And we're going to talk about some of our favorite techniques that when we're working directly with sellers or realtors at times, these are the steps that we take. These are the questions that we're going to ask. And what our job is to ask some great questions, gather the information, and then I go back and I can start doing some research, right, guys? And this is where we're going to do our due diligence. I want to find out if the offer that seller made me makes sense or not, right? So then we're going to break down those steps. Easy peasy, so anybody could do it. I know it sounds scary, but this is the point we've all waited for, right? When we're real estate investors, we're going to be looking for leads. How do I find leads? Well, maybe now you found them. Hopefully you've been listening to our podcast long enough that you could go get these Facebook leads or incoming seller leads for free. I hope you've been watching.
I was going to say, we've definitely gone over a lot of lead generation, and we even tell you what to say to sellers. But then the part that I think a lot of people do get tripped up on or maybe nervous about is how to close the deal. When the negotiations kick in, like that word itself can even be a little high level, a little bit scary. And it's really not, right? What comes with those feelings is the fact that it's unknown or perhaps something that we haven't really done a lot of before. So that's where practice makes perfect. And I think that it's really important to remember that we all started somewhere. And how many times would you listen to closing calls or just hear over and over again our mentors, and until you took the action repeatedly, it was a while before you were able to really fine tune exactly how you literally could say it like in your sleep.
Well, I don't know. I felt like back in the day, I would so badly want to make sure I did it right that it almost paralyzed me. And it almost stopped me from taking action. And I think that was some of the downfall in the beginning. So in 2016 is when we unearthed there was this way to buy real estate without using banks, guys, without using your credit, no W-2s. I didn't have to do 2 years of tax returns and all those things anymore. And these deals we're buying are usually with very little to no cash down. Pay a few thousand in closing cost, slap an insurance policy on the house, and we own a house now. So once we learned that strategy, that was really I definitely wanted to do it this way without a doubt, because now we could scale faster, much easier. These closings go by a lot of times way faster than a traditional one where I got to get bank inspections and appraisals and all those other things. Now we cut around all of that. So once we really learned that, I think the biggest fallback was, okay, holy cow, I finally had somebody say they would consider it, or I'm going to be talking with somebody. So what do I say?
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to get into. So I think the first step is obviously identifying my big factor when I'm having the negotiation. Dials up before we even get to the numbers. I want to find out what's going on with the property. What's the situation like, right? Why are they selling? What's their time frame for selling? Is this something where there's an emergency going on and they need to sell it right away? Or this is something they want to sell in 6 months from now, right?
So you're saying that before you even have to worry about negotiations, the first few questions are some of the most important ones.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we even get down to the nitty gritty, you really need to find out what is their motivation behind why they're doing whatever they're doing. And that's in any type of sales, right? What is the motivation when somebody walks into a car dealership? Well, you're probably looking to buy a vehicle. Maybe you don't do it then. So when somebody's talking to you about what's their motivation behind that, is their old one no good, right? And with a seller, their situation is a whole list of them. We have a whole list of things. I'm relocating, death in the family, a divorce, or who knows what. But we want to identify what that is first. And that's going to be helpful to understand their whole situation. When we start getting down to the nitty gritty, the deal structuring itself, this is where we're going to start talking about the actual numbers. So in our script, it's our opening script. These are the 10 questions we ask every seller. Guys, and if you don't have it, go get it. It's on creativefinanceplaybook.com. It's on there. It's free. Just go download it. But if you're going to download it, make sure you're going to use it. On there is also the way we get leads for free, right? Using Facebook groups. Incoming leads, people who've raised their hands. It's all on there. creativefinanceplaybook.com. Go download that PDF if you don't have it already. But that's the same script that we use, our own team uses, and our clients use to talk to tons of sellers every single day of the week. And these are the questions that we ask every seller, because you got to remember, we're a buyer. We're looking to buy a property. Yes, we're still in sales. We're selling ourselves, our company, the ability to perform, all of these things, but we're the buyer. So we're going to have some questions on this property. These are the exact row that we do. But by these questions, we find all the answers out.
Yeah. But what if they don't give you the answers?
I'd go back to, are they that motivated? Right? They're probably not motivated. So if you're like, I mean, I'll give you an example. I've got somebody who says, I want to sell my house. I'm not going to give you the address, and I'll give you the zip code. No pictures. So based on this zip code and the house being 1,500 square feet, what is your offer from our house? And I'm like,
how are you even supposed to?
What are we even doing? Right. So obviously they're not that motivated.
Yeah.
And then we've got some that are coming in and, hey, I've already found my next house. I'm ready to close on it next week. I'm moving out after I close. I don't want to put my old house on the market. I just want to sell it as is and be done with it.
Yeah.
Right. That's a whole different conversation. So I think that's the key. Finding out who's not motivated, who is, by asking some great questions. They're also going to give you the numbers, what they want for the house. Are they open to terms? Are they open to cash? And this is where you're going to start putting that work together. Okay. But now the magic happens on the closing call. Sorry, I keep on bumping the table. But this is where the magic happens, is on the closing call, where now we're going to actually come to terms. So a lot of my favorite things to do first is identify, like, what are you asking for the property, right? So when you do it, or when I'm doing it, the first question I always ask, because they've already given me their number, is that the best you can do? Really simple, right? So, hey, Jen, I see you want $400,000 for your property. Is that the best you can do?
Are we role playing?
I guess so.
Oh. Well, yeah, it's the best I can do. That's
right.
What I want.
Right. So, okay, well, let me write that down. I think that's in the range for what I'm looking for, right? Before we even proceed to say and fight on the price, I think that's in the range for what I'm looking for. But let's identify the rest of the terms. So we're going to break down that closing call and how we negotiate these deals. So once we're going to identify the 4 legs to the chair, we call it. You know what those are? For me, down payment, right? That's going to be the first thing I'm going to want to talk about, is what is the down payment? So
the down payment meaning how much money does a seller need to walk away with at closing?
Right. Now, I've seen some people say, hey, I'll buy the house with 10% down. Or what if I put in an offer for over asking with 5% down, right? You're just kind of stating what you're going to be willing to do, right? So, and that sounds great and all, but absolutely not. Like, I'm going to put a stop to that right now. We are always going to ask the question, if I were to buy your house, what's the least down you take? I typically buy with no money down. Okay. Those are the phrases. And then we'll find out what number works for them. And many times people say yes to just $100 down. You'd be surprised.
Well, honestly, too, I feel like that just takes so much pressure off, because if you're coming to the table and you start spouting out, like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, and like, you just don't know, it's like way so much, like more than they were even going to give you or ask for, or B, like, you offend them because it's like not enough, right? So I think that we remove all of that just by simply asking the questions. And I that's why I love our approach to that and how we've always done it, because it just takes that scary factor away from it, because you're just collecting more information. Like, it's not like you're like, in this crazy fight with somebody. Like, you're just asking questions.
Right.
It's really that simple, and like, because you can hear sometimes other people who may conduct business different ways, like some people get really hostile or heated over, like, what do you mean that's the only amount you'd give me? Like, they get really upset because they're emotionally attached to these houses. And with our approach, you're just asking questions. It's really that simple.
Well, and I think that's what makes it, I think our approach very simple, very easy, because I know some of the most stressful time is when I feel like I have to make an offer, right? I have to make an offer. Well, if you ask the right questions, the way we've been taught is if you ask the right questions, your seller will make you the offer just by asking the right questions. So what are those questions? First, when I'm talking, once again, I want to identify their price because they've already told me, Jen, I want 400,000 for that house. I always say, is that the best you can do? They're going to say yes or no. All right. So say they say, I'll do 390. I said, I think that's in the range for what I'm looking for. I typically buy with no money down. Okay. And they're either going to say one or two things, yes or no. They're going to say, okay, then you just move on. If they say no, I'm always asking the next question. Well, if I were to do a small down payment, what's the least you would need? All right. Write that down. I've had one, he says that he would do 25% down, right? That's obviously going to be too high, but I wrote down the number. So he wants 180 for his house. This is actually in Clearwater, Florida. So the deal might not be terrible because he's still giving it at a big discount and the house really doesn't need much work. So that's on my hit list. But he says, I want 180 for my house. He wants 25% down. He wants to divide it over 30 years of payments. So amortized over 30 years of payments. At a, what are you smiling about? At a 7% interest rate. So we kind of figured out what the payment would be.
Interest rate is not that great.
Oh, I didn't even read. I didn't counter offer yet. That's just what he threw out by asking the questions.
Okay. Oh, is it's free and clear?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a free and clear property. And he's like, so we asked the questions, what was the least you take? We typically buy with no money down. Absolutely not. I'd only do it 25% down. We said, okay, if we were to do that, what's the least you take for the monthly payment? And he says, well, I would want it over 30 years, divided in payments, amortized. I want 7% interest. I want to have a balloon in 2 to 3 years.
And if you're listening and that just went over your head, you are in the right place because we break this all down because he just talked really quickly. And a lot of those terms are maybe a little higher level. So if you have questions and you're live, drop them below. That is what we're here for. Because when I started on this crazy journey with you back
that's what you're giggling about.
2017, I had no idea what amortization schedule was. I was on a closing call, the first one I ever did. And the guy asked me, and I had no idea what that word was. So
yeah, what term are you going to amortize it over? And I remember you were like, so after the call, I don't know if I was gone and I just got home.
You were working. I called you.
Oh, and you were so upset about it.
Well, because I felt dumb because I didn't know what that word meant. And I feel for anyone who's like, you're getting into this. I was an English teacher, so I've never had to know what these were. And to you, you just knew that was part of your lingo. Like you got it. But we all can learn and we have to like have expansion for being able to learn and grow and understand that you don't know it all because you're always going to be learning. There's always something new to learn in every step of this journey. And if you can give yourself grace, then you will go far. If you beat yourself up along the way and stomp your feet and cry and give up, then you don't get anywhere. So I just want to like share that like vulnerable moment because I didn't know what it meant, but you're throwing out terms like balloon and all the interest rates and all these things. And, you know, to a newbie, like it sounds really intimidating. But we can break it down step by step.
Yeah, and it does. And shout out to Maida who's listening in. But a lot of these things were things that we learned at the car dealership. So, you know, obviously an amortization is basically how many years of payments or months of payments am I dividing it up by? Obviously, the longer term length, 20, 30 years, the lower the monthly payment will be.
And the thing I failed on was I didn't say to the gentleman, hey, that's a great question. Let me check with my partner and get back to you. If I just said that and I checked with my partner and then we got back on the phone, like
everything would have been fine.
I don't think it was a deal because of where it was and all the things. But, you know, it's just giving yourself like that little bit of an out to come back with the right answers because this is not like you don't have to have the whole deal negotiated on this phone call. And that's really the point of closing the deal. If you give yourself a little bit of like speed to lead, yes. Time kills deals, yes. But also you need to sit and actually analyze the deal. You can't just say like, yes, I'm going to buy your house at this price if you've never seen it and you don't have the address.
Well, and that was the funny thing because so many times when we were first getting started doing this full time, you know, we'd be in the kitchen together and I'd be sitting at the kitchen table talking with the seller. Jen's like right behind me doing something. And I'm like, that's a great question. I'm gonna have to check with Jen on that. And she's looking at me like, check with me for what? Like, but I was gathering the information. I wasn't going to have to say yes or no to anything, especially at that time. Unless it was like, I'm going to give you the house for free. Like, I was new. So I really wanted to gather the information and then have some time off of the call to go back and do my research, to do my due diligence. So the thing that was going to trip a lot of folks up is when you get asked a question like XYZ and you're like, oh no, I don't know the answer to that. The easiest thing you could do, and to save face, don't make something up. That's the worst thing you could do. Say, you know what, that's a great question. Let me write that down and I'll make sure you get that answer. And to even take it a step further, I am so glad you asked that question. That's a really good question, Mr. or Mrs. Seller. I'm writing that down right now. Let me find that out for you and I'll get back to you on that. Okay.
Well, that's where imposter syndrome comes in. If like you don't know it, don't try to sit there and like make something up, because it's just going to make the whole situation a heck of a lot worse. You don't have to have all of it figured out in this 10, 15, 20-minute phone call.
And you never will either. I mean, we go to like big meetups and mastermind events, and there's people who've been doing this who are in their 70s and 80s, and they're taking notes of notes and taking more notes than us. And I mean, well, maybe not you, but I didn't have 7 pages of notes from that. And it was impressive. So you're always wanting to learn. So you're never going to know every answer is the point.
Yeah.
So if you ever get thrown a curveball, you don't know the answer, address it and take addressing it to another level and really own that question. You know what, Jen, that is a great question. I'm so glad that you brought that up. You know, I want to make sure I get you the right answer on that. Let me write that down. I'll get back to you. That sounds so much better than like what you said, where imposter syndrome kicks in is when you're trying to throw some fake answer that you don't really know the answer to.
Now you're just making it up, backpedaling, and then like completely crushing the deal. So gather the questions, write them down, take the notes, and then ideally you have your coaches, your mentors to come back to. You know, ask those questions, talk it out a little bit, and be able to work through those things. And again, not every conversation you have is going to be a deal. So take that pressure off yourself as well. It's like when we get into our heads of like, I have to have a deal, I have to make this work, like instead of like going in with how can I help this person, you know, there's 2 different feelings there. And I feel like people can pick up energy over the phone even.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you got to imagine we're humans. We could, sense so many things when we're in person, but when you're on the phone, a lot of the visuals all go away. So now they're really going to base how they know you on how you sound, the tone in your voice, the excitement in your voice, or do you sound like you just woke up and a snail, right?
Or you're just super scared and you're like reading off the script really quickly, so slow down. You always say like, take a deep breath, like stand up tall. You're also like a pacer, so you like to walk around.
Oh, I have to pace. I got to do the Indy 500, walking around the pool 100 times because it relaxes me by doing that, so I don't fidget too bad. But I'm really just having conversation, and I make sure in conversation, I want to ask these 4 or 5 questions.
And one of my favorite phrases that you use and we've always used too is like, hey, like this, may not work out for you, or how do you word it?
Well, yeah, because
this might not be a great fit.
Yeah, this might be a great fit for you, and it might not. We'll find out in a little bit, and if it's not, that's no big deal. But at least maybe I could point you in the right direction.
Yeah.
And if it is a great fit, hooray! I'm looking to buy, so you're talking with a serious buyer, not somebody who's just kicking tires. So I let them know both things that if it doesn't work, like I'm not going to make it feel icky. I'm not going to call you up in the middle of the night crying saying I want to buy it, right? Like somebody just broke up with you. You got to just take it. But once again, if it's no, it doesn't mean no forever. It just means maybe no at that second.
Yeah. And that's where like literally just popped in my head, like the follow-up and you being organized, whether it's with a notebook or a Google Calendar or any sort of management board that is available these days, to just take your notes, seller's name, those 4 deal points, the address, when you talk to them, and then just keep following up, because so many times where someone says I need 28% down or I need, 7% interest rate, and you talk to them 30, 60, 90, 120 days, like they're changing their minds a little bit.
Oh yeah. We've had many that were like, hey, I need $50,000 down. And then they end up closing at like, hey, can you do $5,000 down? I would take that months and months later.
Yeah.
So you're right. Stay on top of it. And I think that's key, because if the deal doesn't work right now, that doesn't mean it will never work, but you just have to make sure you stay on top of it and treat this as a business. Be serious about what you're doing. Follow up is key. And I just had one of our client stories talk about where he was working with the seller. The seller said no to his price. He's been in touch with the seller back and forth, but the seller kind of like disappeared. The seller reaches back out to him. He's like, good, are we ready to do business? And he's like, I just had that sold to somebody else at that same price. And he's like, you didn't call me back. He's like, no, but I'm calling you about a different property. So that was kind of cool, I guess, right? But still, that gets a little frustrating. So I think taking that extra step to make sure you're in front of your sellers, the ones who are motivated, the ones who have a situation going on, the ones who are, you know, in need of help, and maybe listing it with an agent isn't their best option, because most of the time, and many times, that is a great option.
Well, and then some of them are almost so easy. You're like, what that? Like the guy in Jacksonville right now.
Yep.
I mean, I know he took a little time to finally sign. I think he was busy at the end there, but he was like, yep.
Yeah, he was easy peasy. Like, hey, come by it. $100 down's fine for me. I've already got my next house. I'm already ready to move. So I'm ready. And I love it when deals like that come together. I feel like something will happen, so I'm going to jinx myself live. But, you know, it happens. And if you do, just figure out what the workaround, because we just got word today that we had a deal. This was in Buffalo, New York, out of one of the suburbs. And the seller, it was open to terms. She inherited another home. She's already moved into the other home. She's trying to make 2 payments. And I always say this, like, if your housing payment just doubled because you had a second home now and you had to pay for both, like, would that put a struggle on your bills? You know, and for some people that probably would. Most it probably would, right? Of course it would. So that's why she wanted to sell. It's not a junker house. It's not in a bad neighborhood. But however, she had somebody right before we were closing living in the house, squatting there. So it took months, especially in upstate New York. It took months, but the squatter is now out, and she says, I'm ready to close, right? But now there's other situations that have popped up because there's been some payments that are falling behind. So there's some work that needs to be done there. So just when you think you have a deal, sometimes they fall off, but then they come back. And I think the real name of the game is being on top of your business. Like, understanding whatever you see on Instagram, when you see somebody taking a walk through the park, and like, oh, I just tripped and fell over this rock and I scuffed my leg. And
I'm just out here sunbathing and we bought 5 properties.
Yeah, and I just bought a duplex, right? Like, no, I wish it was that simple. It's really not. Like, you got to put in the work. There's going to be some times you feel like your heart gets broken, but then it gets fixed. It's just what it is.
We talked about this today on my coaching call I did with our clients, and it's like you eat problems for breakfast and sometimes lunch and dinner and dessert, but it's all part of it. And that's what we are. We're problem solvers. And when you just get used to it and realize, okay, this is the next thing to tackle, and then you just focus on that. Once you handle that, you work on the next thing. And you can't look at like big picture, scary, oh my gosh, mountain. And it's just like the next right step. So in the very beginning, it's just, are you generating leads? Are you talking to people? Like, those are the 2 things you need to focus on. And then from there, are you asking them the right questions? Like, what are you saying to the people? Because if you are generating leads and talking to people and you're not closing deals, then there's your bottleneck, right? You know, you might not be saying the things that you need to say in these closing calls.
Well, and I look back, right before we got on this call, I was looking back at some, like, from the beginning of her and myself and Jen and myself, and 16 years ago, 2008, I know, right?
Oh boy.
16 years ago, but we were negotiating on our very first deal that we were buying together.
That's crazy.
And when we looked at it back then, it was just kind of like a laughing, like, little hobby thing that we first started doing. I
don't know what you were doing. I was like, why on earth would you want this little tiny house over here in this place called Rondequoit?
Right. It needs a roof. The garage looks like it's tipping over. It was tipping over, right? The whole house.
And we were in Vegas on a destination wedding, and I was like getting a little mad because you were spending time, but I didn't have the mindset or the vision yet. And so I was very much like, well, we're here to have fun. And you're like, yeah, but this is a really great deal.
Yeah. So this is when back then, I was looking at the house. We were going back and forth with the realtor. It was on the market. We were trying to get a deal on it. This was back in 2008 when the market was taking a dip. So these deals were back then, you could find them. And so we ended up buying that deal and closing on it a few months later, but this is when it got started. So it just starts one deal at a time. And so everybody sees, like, I need to get to this certain number or whatever that looks like. It just starts with one deal at a time. And And I think taking those little small steps. So how do I do that? Like what Jenn said a second ago.
Pig-headed determination too. Like you were not letting me in my small mindset. I fully admit it. Like I didn't understand back then.
Oh, you were just a girlfriend back then.
I was just a girlfriend too. So let's be honest. Although you did take me to the Bellagio. So
hey, nice. I really liked you. You were really awesome.
But the point being, I was annoyed at how many times I got really frustrated. And then once I kept doing work on myself, listening to the personal development, the Jim Rohns, the Napoleon Hills, the Zig Ziglars, and really starting to realize, wow, like either you're going to live in this dealership world forever and a day, and I'm going to be this teacher who's going to, knock into teachers. I loved my job, but work really hard to like get a bell at the end of the career and a good pension or whatever. Like,
pat in the back.
Like, I don't know. And literally like get yelled at by people's, kids' parents. And it was just, I don't know. When you start shifting your mindset, like keep going with that is my point there.
Well, and I think too, it's just one small step at a time, right? Yeah. It all starts just one step at a time, even feeding your brain with the right stuff. Mm-hmm. Because if you've got a spouse out there, your guy or your girl doesn't have your back and you want to still buy real estate, like stick to what you want to do. There's many times where it was just me in the beginning where I'm dragging into these houses. I feel bad.
I just brought a book. I was just reading my book in the driveway and I don't know, you were in there doing whatever. And then you kept buying more properties and then you couldn't keep up with the tax bills. And then I realized,
well, then I put a ring on it. I got married and had kids. And I think that was the big key right there. And then when the tax bills all got mailed to one rental, which we still have no idea how that happened, that's where you kind of got thrusted in there where now like you're in the driver's seat too.
Yeah.
And then before you know it, we start learning more about creative finance. We learn how to buy real estate without banks, because I think part of the pain was burring where we'd buy these houses cash. That's what we were doing because these houses were fixer-uppers that we were finding. We'd have to manage contractors to go remodel these places, go find a renter that moves in so I could have that lease shown to the bank. So now they would refinance it and give us our cash back. But once you find that one deal, and by the time you close on it, renovate it, find the right renter, and then go to the bank and then start the refinance process. By the time you yank your money out, you could maybe do one a year. Yeah, you could probably do it a little bit quicker depending on the remodeling of the house. Mm-hmm. But some of these that we found were actually like fixer-uppers, like they needed some work. So it wasn't like a 2-week turnover period. But I think that was the key to it, is once we learned how to do it this way without banks, that's where our business could really take off. But it got you and me more into the driver's seat. Mm-hmm. Right. It was a little bit more of not as casual because now we're actually like showcasing what it was on social media.
We're so reliant on realtors, and realtors are great for a lot of things. But the way that we were able to, and I didn't realize, but like some people are like kind of like turned off by like trying to add more properties by themselves. And I guess is that because perhaps they don't know how easy it is to just talk to people? Like, I don't know. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Like, I feel like we become so reliant on the MLS and realtors and showings, but then now people are going and they're seeing like, if I buy a property this way, it's not going to cash flow. So instead of like going, oh man, it's not working, like change your strategy, start talking to off-market sellers, help them with a problem that they have a house for sale that they either don't want to list or can't list or aren't listed, whatever it is, and then run them through the questions, and if it's a deal, and like write it up. But
and I think that was the point we find a lot of people who don't want to list their house in the market.
Right. But I'm saying like investors think like, I don't know, you don't have to have a huge team. You don't have to have an office. You don't have to have like a million people working with you. Like you can literally do this in the cracks of your day.
Yep.
If you want to add one property a year, if you want to add one property a month, like depends on how much time you're willing to give. But
and I think that's the key. How do we find that time?
You make the time.
Certain things, recommendations.
Yeah. Start by waking up 15, 20 minutes earlier, and then hopefully you can increase that to like an hour or maybe 2.
Because you sit there every morning and do that and journal and get some work done early.
Yeah, this morning I dove right into work, but but I think that you just have to figure that part out. For you, you used to get up early and go right into your emailing attorneys, checking. I mean, because you before we figured out the free Facebook way, like you were trying to go through. Well, you were doing Zillow, you were doing Craigslist, you were
yeah.
Facebook Marketplace for landlords. So you've always been tinkering and messaging, but like we've almost made it too easy. I can't believe more people don't do this.
I am telling you, you're speaking to the choir.
Yeah.
We have so many of our clients who are like, you put this post into a handful of Facebook groups, people are going to reach out to you, which has been way better conversations, way better conversion rates than.
I had one gentleman today say like he had to stop posting because he's like, I can't even, because his full-time job is so demanding. Now he's at the point where maybe I hire a virtual assistant to help me kind of ask some of these questions, or how to.
So he makes a post and gets too many people reaching out.
Yeah, like he's like, I can't post anymore because I can't even keep up with the incoming inquiries that are coming through the couple of ads like free posts that he's putting out there. So it's a great problem to have, but now he's at that. So that's what we're saying. Like, there's always going to be that next problem, but they're great problems to have, right? Like,
when you've got too many leads, I will tell you guys that's a great problem to have, especially if you're not paying for them. That's the best problem to have, right? But you got to now convert them. You got to have the conversations, which is key, and finding those little cracks in the day, I think, is really the key. So finding time to either buy your time back by maybe hiring somebody to do your lawn. And that 1 hour that it used to take you to do it, now you're making actual seller calls. You're not sitting there YouTubing it out, watching the next video. Like, you're actually doing something to move your business forward. So maybe I've done some Facebook posts. Some of these people have messaged me back and it sounds like we could do business. Well, maybe in that 1 little hour block, you have 2 or 3 calls lined up.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the key, is actually getting on the call. So here we are talking about how to close a real estate deal, but we didn't talk about how to do it on the phone. Right? How to actually pick up that phone and have the conversations. Now, I will say, and I don't like it, but I'm going to say it, we've closed deals never talking on the phone, just with Messenger. And you might find that as a very rare occurrence where somebody has a job and it's difficult for them to talk, but they can message. But we have done it that way. But my favorite way is to get on the phone, build rapport, find out what's going on in their situation. By building rapport, like, oh, you have a dog? I have a dog too. Like, now, it's more of like talking about them and their situation and all of the things that they've got going on. I think that's really the key.
Yeah, and I think you're really good at what the term is, mirroring. So if somebody's on the phone, like talking really quickly and they're really jazzed up and they're da-da-da-da-da-da, like you kind of like talk that way back. But if it's maybe an older woman who's just a little bit slower speaking, or, you can tell she's very apprehensive, like you slow down and your tonality changes too. So it's like really kind of like mimicking how like their personality is through the phone conversation, I think puts them at ease. Because if you're talking to like someone from, I don't know, Alabama or Georgia, and you come in as New Yorker,
oh my gosh,
you're probably going to lose them.
Well, that's what happens.
Or the opposite, right? Like if you're like slow talking and you got Mr. New Jersey on the phone,
they're like, hurry up, get what's going on here, right? So it's really mirroring who you're working with. And if you do have somebody who's not in a big rush and they take their time, like, well, then make sure you're mirroring that. There's some steps you could take to help them get down the road a little bit faster. But I think that's the key, is really talking, understanding who you're dealing with. And that's key.
Would you say that How to Win Friends and Influence People was probably one of the biggest books that helped you just?
Yep. I think that Dale Carnegie was one of the first ones that I read that really opened my eyes as far as sales. And it's really a book about communicating and how to handle yourself in these situations. And it was really eye-opening to me, because I feel like so many times in sales, like you want to have like, it's almost like peacocking, where one person flexes their feathers and the next one tries to do the same thing. And I think it's actually the opposite of that. Like it come from a servant's heart, right? Yeah. Be very humble about what it is you're doing. Be very well informed of what you're doing. And I think that's always been the key to helping people. And that's what this is about, is finding out a win for them, finding out with all of the knowledge that we know, all the different strategies we could do deals. How can I help this person solve their real estate problem? And maybe it's not even in my bag of tricks. Maybe it is, hey, go talk to Janet. She's a great realtor. She could list the house for you. Maybe it is, let's talk about a cash deal, because this is a fixer-upper and you do need some money and you're giving it to us for a really big discount. Or my favorite deal is when they say, yes, I am open to seller financing if you're paying that price, and I will do payments, right? Or
So I think that is so key too. So like if you are messaging with somebody and they start the negotiation like almost before like you got through everything, like would you say that that's the time? Like don't keep messaging through that. Like try to get on a phone call.
Instantly, yeah. So
if they start throwing out balloons or terms or
so we have a house rule with our staff, and this has been around for a while. The minute you're messaging with the seller, hey, can you please tell me your address? Why do you want to sell? How soon are you looking to sell? Does it need any work? Right. And a couple of the questions we're going to ask, if a seller at any points starts to negotiate, that's where we want to hop off of messaging and get on the call and actually get on the call and start having that conversation with them about that. Right. If they're nice, they're friendly. That's when I do. Where once again, Mr. I'm never going to sell my house. I'm not selling it, but what would you pay for it? Like, I'm not going to probably waste my time talking to him on the phone.
Like the one our daughter saw, it was like, no way, no how, no seller finance. And then she went and pulled it up on Zillow. She's like, well, that's all right.
Yeah. I was like, hey, honey, ask him, are you sure? And of course, mom's like, don't do that. But
I
so
think they said stop.
I'm just teasing. But so that's the fun part about it, guys. You got to have fun with it too. You can't be too uptight.
Being compliant.
Yeah, but like have fun with the sellers. We try to be very uptight about it. Hey, Tommy, good to see you. And I think that's the real joy of it is actually finding out. And sometimes like, boy, you listen to some really sad stories and it's really difficult to navigate through it. Just be sympathetic. Listen. Sometimes they just want an ear to talk to, but don't spend hours.
Right.
But the second part of it is we have a plan, and that's to see if we could do business. So I think that's the key. So once again, getting back to the negotiating, we want to identify their price. I'm looking for people who will take terms where I could buy a house without banks, no credit involved, right? So it comes down to the 4 legs of the chair, your price, your down payment. We typically buy with no money down, okay? All right. The monthly payment, and that can be negotiated on a free and clear property. So remember, whatever that payment is, on top of that, you're going to also have to pay the property taxes and insurance. And maybe there's an HOA in certain communities. So you have to incorporate that added to the payment. But you could back into a payment of whatever it could be. That's why I love those free and clear properties.
What do you mean back into a payment?
So say, for an example, you want to buy $1 million house. I want a vacation home in Florida and it costs $1 million. Well, I know everybody listening is like, well, geez, that's a lot of money. And it sure is. It's $1 million. But what if you were to able to negotiate a payment of $1,000 a month with your seller? Right? Back into the payment, because on top of that, Mr. Seller or Mrs. Seller, I have to pay the taxes, the insurance, and if there's an HOA. So altogether, my payment will be about that. Right? So if you're going to go to a bank, you don't have that option. The bank's going to say you're financing this much at this rate. This is what your payment is. You can't negotiate that payment. The only way you can negotiate it is by going a shorter or longer term length, right? If you went from a 15-year mortgage to a 30-year, that's going to lower your payment, right? You can negotiate by putting more money down, but it's not really negotiating. You're just changing the deal by putting cash into the deal. But with creative finance, we can negotiate all of those points with the seller. I can negotiate my interest rate, what my monthly payment is, what the term length is, my down payment, all of these wonderful things. And when we realize that we control the pen, we control the agreements, we control the terms by doing this, this is where I think all the like fireworks started going off in my head. I was like, holy cow. So
when you're on the phone and you always say like, you're kind of like pulling the lever, right? So, okay, well, I want to ask him about the purchase price and you hear it and you're not really in love with it, but you just like, don't push too hard. Right. And then you go on to the next part where you're trying to figure out the down payment and they kind of throw like the sky high number out. Like at what point would you start to do your negotiations? Like, do you kind of individually like go through each one, or like what is the thought process in your head as you're on these phone calls with the sellers?
So I'll go over a scenario. We got a seller. He wants $400,000 for his property. I look it up on Zillow. I'm doing all my research. It's probably $400,000 house. So he wants top of the range. And I know as an investor, guys, we all have to get a good deal. So paying top of the range is usually not getting you a great deal, right? We always want a discount. It's hard for me to even understand that in the very beginning. So a seller has a house, he wants 400,000, it's worth probably high side that. Now, if we could talk about the down payment and he wants a high amount, maybe he wants 25% down like our other seller, and he wants, $100,000 down. And, sometimes with me, what I'm going to do is look at the deal and knowing my most important thing and his most important thing are probably two different things. So what do I mean by that? His most important thing is he got his price. Mm-hmm. He got 400,000 for it, right? He got top dollar for his house. For me, that's not the most important thing. My most important thing is how much cash do I have to go to closing in order to make this deal work? Do I need $100,000 and it's 25% down, or can I do this deal with $5,000 down? Can I do that deal with $10,000 down and pay some closing costs? So if I'm going to negotiate when I'm looking at the seller, you said like the different levers I could pull. Well, if I could let the seller feel like he got his price by paying 400,000, but John, if I were to buy it at your price and I cover all of the closing costs and fees, I typically buy with no money down. Okay. No, I need 100,000. I want 25% down. Yeah. Unfortunately that wouldn't work. Is there any way we could get closer to the $5,000 down, maybe $10,000 down tops if I'm paying all the fees and paying that price? And we're counter offering, right? So he made the first offer by giving us that number. Now we're going to counter offer, and knowing that I'm going to anchor myself at zero money down, because we typically buy with no money down. And if I'm going to go up, they're going to be in very small increments. I'm not going to go to 100. I'm going to need him to come closer to my number in order for that deal to work. But then there's other levers too, like the monthly payment. Hopefully you got a cash flow, so that's got to work too, right? And then number 3, I need a long-term length. If I'm paying top dollar for his house, I don't want to have to worry about getting them, I'll let you do payments for a year and then you have to refinance it and pay me off. Or I want to have you do that in 5 years. Like, I'm going to want some good term length as far as how long he'll let me do it for, or she or whomever, right? So I'm probably going to want a minimum of probably 7-8 years, ideally 10, 15, and 20. So those are my levers I like to pull. All of them could be counteractive with another. Sometimes that $400,000 house, they're willing to sell it to me at $225,000, but they say I want to get cashed out in 1 year. Well, I've got a big discount. I can do a shorter term. So all of these kind of change with each other. So it's kind of exciting. I know it sounds like a lot, but this is a lot of the things we dive really deep into with our training, because it's a little bit different than wholesaling or fix and flips, where I'm buying it at this price, and does that price work with the amount of rehab it needs, or does it not work? With that price house, with that interest rate, does this deal work or not? Right? And so it's a little bit easier doing that stuff, where here, there's a few different levers that you can pull to negotiate a deal. So I can't tell you how many times other investors were talking to the same seller that we were. We would make the deal, we would pay way more than they would, and they're sitting there scratching their heads because they're cash buyers. So they're making a cash offer, and here we're able to do terms at a much higher price.
Just by asking some questions.
We try to make it easy.
We try. It's not hard. I mean, just figuring it all out. I thought we had one question here. Hello. Ever use balloon payment with your terms? If so, how long? I think you kind of just touched on that.
Yeah, so there are times where, what's a balloon payment? Well, I'm going to answer that. So usually your seller, if they're going to sell you the house, they'll let you divide the payments up over 30 years. That's probably the most common term length, but they all could be different. But what a balloon means is at one point, say 10 years into it, they're going to want to get paid off then as a big lump. And so whatever you owe at that 10-year mark, or you've already paid the first 10 years, whatever you owe at that point, they're going to say, I need that in a balloon, one big payment. Okay. So when I'm talking with the seller, they'll say, Joe, I'll let you do, 30 years worth of payments, but I want to get a balloon at 10 years or 5 years. So here's the key with creative finance. You're going to make your money off the most term length. That's one of my biggest things. The longer the term length, the better you are. The seller who will give you 5 years, 6, 10 years, that's fine. If the deal works, it works. But the sellers that give you 20 to 30 years, that's where you're going to really do well. So for us, I'm looking at the longest term length possible. So to answer your question, do we ever use balloon payments with our terms? Yes, we do. If so, how long? That's up to our seller, because I always ask them, if I were to make you payments and I'm making you that payment every month, what's the longest you let me make those payments to you for? And they'll tell me, well, geez, I mean, that sounds good. I get $1,000 a month. Well, geez, I'll let you make a $1,000 a month payment for me for the next 10 years. And if they tell me a number, I could always say, well, can you do this? Right? Joe, can you do 10 years? Is there any way I could get 15? So you could always counter offer, and they might say yes or no, or I'll meet in the middle, whatever that looks like. So that's what we do. Every deal is different. Longer the better.
Boom. All right. Keep the questions coming.
Bam.
Steven, do you ever wrap deals and turn your position to the lender side?
So what we're being asked here is, do we ever buy a deal to where now we are buying it with a creative finance, which is called a wrap mortgage, and then sell that to somebody else, right? To where we're not even the owner anymore, but we might get a difference in the interest rate. You could mark up the rate a little bit. You can mark up the property sometimes too. To answer your question, we don't. If I were to, it'd probably be in the state of Texas, because you have to do seller financing there. Lease options work there, but it's a little bit more tricky. The other 49 states, it's a lot easier. So ideally for us, I want to own real estate. And that's really been the key for me. I want to own it. I want to control the deed. I want to have depreciation. I want to also get the benefits of appreciation. I like the cash flow. With our rent to own, our renters are responsible for all the maintenance and repairs anyways. So I know a bank wouldn't have to fix a plug toilet, but with our agreement, we wouldn't have to either. And we still get the benefits of ownership. So I'm not saying it's a bad strategy. I know a lot of people who do it that way, and it's probably great. Our favorite is actually getting to own the property itself. And then sometimes our renters give the property back, right? So we've had people move in, rent to own, and then say, I'm going to buy it in 1 year. And then 3 years later, 4 years later, oh my gosh, I'm moving out. I got a relocation for my job. Some people have just given it back. Some people have met love on the other side of town, I keep saying, but it's true. And he moved in with her and they got engaged. So there's many reasons why somebody moves in. They give you a large non-refundable option deposit. They're going to be there paying rent for a bunch of years, and then they actually don't execute to buy. They give you the property back, and then you could release it to somebody else with, different terms, but doing another rent to own. So once they do leave the property, they don't own it. We still do. So it's much easier just to put our next renter in there too. So those are, I think, some of my sticking points to why we love doing rent to own so much.
Yeah.
But seller finance still rocks too. Don't get me wrong.
I think it's kind of, I don't want to say like trendy, but I feel like it's something about the marking up an interest rate to some people. But.
Oh, well, I got to do that at my old job, guys. So when you go to a car dealership, when you sign your agreement and your interest rate on your car loan is 7%, well, that bank, whoever that is, usually gave them a little bit of a better interest rate, and they're able to mark up that interest rate. Everybody, lenders, they all do it. It's the same thing. So it's not just one thing or the other. But so when you buy a house, and I'll get into the example, say somebody says, Jen, I will sell you my house. I've got a loan on it right now with Bank of America at 3%. And if you give me $5,000 down, you could take it over for the next 20 years, right? They don't have any equity or something like that. Well, that's going to have a really low payment and a really low interest rate. So ideally, I can sell that property with seller financing if I want. And the difference is I could sell it to somebody else for a different price, higher than I bought it for. But more important, instead of them getting a 3% interest rate, I could charge them 7%. So now I don't own the property and I'm holding 4 points of interest over, 30 years.
But if they stop paying, you have to foreclose.
You got to foreclose. Yep. But in Texas, it's like 45 days. You try to foreclose on places like New York and Massachusetts and California and some of these other places. Yeah. My gosh, it's torture. So that's why we like a lease in some of those states, because they're a little bit easier to get the property back if the deal goes backwards. So I think that's key.
Hey, I'll throw your number out there.
Oh, bam. So guys, I got to drop this too. Some of you have heard us on Bigger Pockets. Well, we're super excited that our Bigger Pockets podcast is dropping live tomorrow, July 3rd, 2024. where we just went and did a super deep dive on rent to own and why it's so awesome. So we were lucky enough to be on Bigger Pockets last year, and it's an honor that they're very picky who they have on their platform. So when we went on there last year, we talked about how we buy real estate with creative finance, moved to Florida, homeschool our kids,
got out of the golden
handcuffs and got to quit my job. And now to do this full time, which, gets me choked up once in a while, because like when we first met, you were a teacher. I was just somebody who worked at a car dealership, and we had this fantasy of one day we're going to get married and have kids and move to Florida when
we're
going to
run a business.
Right. And then we legitly checked every one of those boxes out.
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty cool. And I feel lucky we got to do this, but it's all the knowledge that we put in, all of the hard work. But so like when we did that deep dive on creative finance on Bigger Pockets, we lightly touched on rent to own, but they wanted to have us back to do a second deep dive on that. So we just did that, filmed it. It's coming out tomorrow. So super excited. So we'll share the link, I'm sure. But take a look in that. So if you want to learn more about rent to own, there's going to be awesome.
They asked a lot of great questions. It's kind of fun being interviewed on it, because like we talk about it all day long, but when someone else who's not as familiar is asking really good questions, so like we could break it down live on an interview. It's really cool.
Yeah, and they don't really talk too much about that strategy, which I'm kind of surprised, because I can't tell you how many landlords that I've talked to who own some properties and they're just not making money. And that used to be us. So you're like, I totally understand, right?
I think it's almost like a taboo or like ashamed, like, because it's really cool to own a lot of doors, but like it's not cool to say like, oh, well, I was cash flowing a couple hundred, but then I had to go put a new roof on, or a big water problem just happened, or XYZ. I mean, all the things that happen with real estate.
Or somebody moves out and you got 2 months of payments you're covering.
Yeah.
Before you find your next renter. Like all of those little things that happen, that's why I think rent to own really changed our life. And if you're a landlord and you own a property, a single family home, or even a duplex, because people house hack and do all that kind of stuff too. But if you have a single family home rental and it's not cash flowing, and, first one we did, I remember we met the people at Tim Hortons, which is like a coffee shop. We sat outside because it was a beautiful night. We went over how everything worked with rent to own. They're moving in. They're able to pay rent until they're able to qualify for a mortgage later on. Pretty simple. And then short time after, we got a check for $10,000 when they moved in, which, like, holy cow, that was a lot of money.
Yeah.
Like, wow. I was so excited when we got that check, because we were only getting first month's rent and a security deposit. So once we did that one property and it set proof of concept, and these people later on bought the house, and they are wonderful. They're like, they send tons of people our way, like most awesome, amazing people. Shout out, Mike, if you're watching. Congratulations again. But what ended up happening from that is we ended up having a few of our other rentals and got $10,000 checks, $15,000 checks. We got a $32,000 check for one of our properties. And when you get to deposit that money into your account, because this is a non-refundable option deposit, not some security deposit you have to keep, like, my gosh, what does that do for your business? I'll tell you, it was huge for us.
Guess, go ahead.
No, you're.
Well, I just, it racks my brain as people just want to be long-term landlords because they don't want to lose a door and they don't want to worry about buying more. Like, how are you truly making money until you pay that property off and maybe you
burn it for 30 years? Well, that's the whole point, is you end up financing it for 30 years.
But then, even then, you get let's say you have a long-term renter in there for 10 years.
Yeah.
Cash flow maybe $300 a month, but you've been fixing little things along the way. And now this person finally moves out after 10 years. You've got a kitchen to fix. You've got a bathroom. You're
definitely doing flooring and paint.
Right. So, I mean, I guess you're banking on appreciation, depreciation, but I mean, what am I missing? Like, what?
So the goal is to own a lot, and then when you're 90 years old, you're going to own all these houses.
But then you pass it off to your kids, and they get to either sell them off or
generally what happens.
I don't know, because I really enjoy the strategy of helping renters become owners, and then we get a really nice check, and then we can reinvest that and buy more. And I know that we have an acquisitions company where we like to fix and flip. We do some wholesale deals. We may assign a terms deal to the right person, but I don't know.
Ideally, I know. Believe me, I know. This is the strategy to why we are able to make money when you're sleeping, because that's the whole key is, guys, if you're only making money when you're at work, we were taught poorly. I think it's not just about making money while you're at work. That's enough just to pay your bills and survive. To really get ahead is you have to have those other little things. And I can't tell you how many times back in the day at the car dealership where I used to tell everybody you need to have a side hustle. And then eventually, hopefully, your side hustle starts making you so much money, you can't afford to go to work anymore. And I think that was the key, is finding out that, and maybe it's not real estate. I love it because everybody's going to need a house, somebody to live. It's a very high ticket item. There's transactions happening, thousands all over the world, all of the time. Doesn't matter what's happening. So that's why I love real estate. And it's also cool, like getting some old, house that was beautiful back in the day. Now it's all ran down. Now you make it back to beautiful again. Like turning around some of these neighborhoods, the neighbors, like you live next door to a rundown house that's been that way for a long time, and someone comes in and makes it beautiful, and then a family moves in next door. Like, what a cool thing is that happened. So, when you're able to do that, it's really a blessing.
Yeah, it really are helping a ton of people.
And then with rent to own, obviously too, we're turning renters into homeowners. So if we're giving somebody a house, like we're actually giving them the ability to live the American dream and own a home. And that's the cool thing too. So I think, I don't know. I'm never going to stop doing it.
I'm not going back to like just traditional renting. That's for sure.
Nope. So if this sounds like something you want to learn more about, Creative Finance Playbook, it's dropping down below. So if you're watching, great, there it is. CreativeFinancePlaybook.com.
Or if
you're listening, go check that out. Also, my cell phone number. I did leave it on Bigger Pockets the first time, and I did get a lot of calls. So I don't know what tomorrow's going to be like. It should be exciting. But my cell phone number is 585-207-2240. So if you've got questions and you want to talk about maybe a deal or maybe even getting into our mentorship program, guys, like we would love to talk to you and go over what that looks like. Because I'll tell you, it's not even just us. Like our clients all over the country right now are crushing it. You did our support call this morning.
Yeah, we've had a couple have 3 deals closing next week, and another one's getting ready to do rent to own. We've got several who are just placed their first rent to own home buyers.
There's stuff popping up all
in
over.
Pennsylvania. They have another rent to own. It looks gorgeous. So yeah, it's so exciting. So if that's something you want to take a peek at, let us know. It's just funny how organically in 2020 we started just sharing a little bit about how we're buying properties and talking about it through Instagram, and then started having little classes because I realized how much I miss teaching. And you've always been a leader and a sales trainer essentially in your job. You always had that leadership role, and I think that, I don't know, there's no cooler feeling than being able to help others also live out their dreams. Maybe moving to Florida is not your dream, but man, it was ours. And I'm so glad that we're here and we can pay it forward and help others along the way here.
Well, not only that too, part of our acquisition team went up north, and during the meeting this morning, they're in a blanket, freezing cold.
Yeah,
and
65.
I'm like, yay.
But now my sister and my brother-in-law and my nephew are here, so we're able to.
They're my sister-in-law, brother-in-law, and nephew too.
Yeah, we worked some hours yesterday and today, but I'm excited to sign off for a little bit, enjoy some family time, because that is what it's all about. So
yeah,
awesome.
So
happy 4th, Travis.
Good to see you, Travis. So everybody have a happy 4th of July.
Safe.
Enjoy America's birthday. We work hard. We live in a great country.
We gotta get some more sparklers. I told the kids.
Oh boy, it's gonna be sparkling here on the 4th. So have a wonderful 4th. I'll tell you guys. Today is July 2nd. This is the 3rd quarter of the year. It's the 2nd day of the 3rd quarter. And I will tell you, this is probably my favorite quarter of the entire year. It's not over yet. We got plenty of time to hit the gas. So if you are in your real estate business, this is when people want to sell. The market usually kind of slows down a little bit right now. So there's some pent up demand from sellers who need to sell their property. So definitely be hitting it. I think that's the key. We want to take summer vacation off and things like that. And that's cool. Like
take a couple days. Do not take the entire summer.
Don't take a couple months.
Yep. So we're going to play on this whole 4th of July being freedom, the month of that. So tune in next Tuesday as we come live sharing our top 5 creative finance hacks on how you can unlock financial freedom with using these strategies. We're so excited to come to you live every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, give us a like and a follow. And then, of course, Apple and Spotify. If you like what you're hearing, please leave us a positive review and tune in for next week.
We'll see you next week, guys.
Bye.
See y'all.